Page 21, questions 136 through 142. Question 136. Where is emergency power not required according to code? Data centers. According to code, emergency power is not required for data centers. Question 137. What is the most widely used regulation book by operating engineers? Is EPA. The EPA manual is the most widely used regulation book for operating engineers. Question 138. What type of refrigerant do you need FDNY approval for? Propane. You need FDNY approval to use propane as a refrigerant. Question 139. Centrifugal pressure is determined by speed of motor. Centrifugal pressure is determined by the speed of the motor. Question 140. A single-phase 208 VSE circuit has two hot wires. Tile third is the ground. In a single-phase 208 VSE circuit, there are two hot wires, and a third wire, which is the ground wire. Question 141. Liquid refrigerant that has passed through a metering device is a low-pressure saturated liquid. The liquid refrigerant that has passed through a metering device is a low-pressure saturated liquid. Question 142. With a 75-degree dry bulb and a 73-degree wet bulb, the relative humidity is very high. Relative humidity can be found by subtracting the temperature on the wet bulb thermometer from the temperature on the dry bulb thermometer and using a relative humidity chart. Dry bulb temperature, aka air temperature, is always higher than wet bulb temperature. If they are equal, it is 100% relative humidity. The closer the two temperatures are, the higher the relative humidity. Page 22, questions 143 through 149. Question 143. After recovering liquid refrigerant from a centrifugal chiller, the next step is to recover vapor. After recovering liquid refrigerant, vapor is recovered next. Question 144. Where is the muffler located? Between the compressor and condenser. The muffler is located between the compressor and the condenser. Question 145. What is not required to be serviced annually? Compressors. Compressors are not required to be serviced annually, but fire extinguishers, fire pump motors, and diesel engine systems are required to be serviced annually. Question 146. What is the advantage of a shell and tube condenser, as opposed to a shell and coil condenser? Better heat transfer. A shell and tube condenser has better heat transfer than a shell and coil condenser. Question 147. Fusible plugs on a condenser. The melting point is marked on it. Fusible plugs on a condenser have the melting point marked on them. Question 148. How much extra refrigerant can be stored in a machine room? 330 pounds. 330 pounds of extra refrigerant can be stored in a machine room. Question 149. What is used on an outside pipe to prevent it from freezing? Resistor. A resistor is used on an outside pipe to prevent it from freezing. Page 23, questions 150 through 156. Question 150. Of the following, centrifugal chillers are best characterized as high tonnage, low pressure machines. Centrifugal chillers are best characterized as high tonnage, low pressure machines. Question 151. As an engineer, you'd notice pressure drops across the evaporator. You check and notice the external equalizer line is disconnected. What will occur in the evaporator? Evaporator will flood. If the external equalizer line is disconnected, pressure will drop across the evaporator and the evaporator will flood. Question 152. When entering Phase 2 fireman's service, what statement is correct? The elevator operator is the only person that could control the elevator. When entering Phase 2 fireman's service, the elevator operator is the only person that could control the elevator. Question 153. An FDNY permit is required to conduct hot works for use of oxygen and flammable gas. To conduct hot works for use of oxygen and flammable gases, an FDNY permit is required. Question 154. FDNY is most concerned with which ASHRAE refrigerant classification? A3. The FDNY is most concerned with the A3 ASHRAE refrigerant classification, which are higher flammability refrigerants. Question 155. How long must a fire alarm logbook be kept? 3 years. A fire alarm book must be kept for 3 years. Question 156. What is the minimum requirement an engineer needs to log readings? Once per shift. An engineer needs to log readings at least 1 time per shift. Page 24, questions 157 through 163. Question 157. You are the only engineer on duty with the machine running. A vice president tells you to shovel snow. What should you do? Do not leave building. If you are the only engineer on duty, with a machine running, do not leave the building even if an important person asks you to do something directly outside the building such as shoveling snow. Question 158. How often must you do emergency power testing? Monthly. Emergency power testing must be done every month. Question 159. What is the responsibility of a B29 COF holder? Inspect the battery system. The responsibility of a B29 COF holder is to inspect the battery system. Question 160. Why is a refrigerant gauge called a compound gauge? It reads positive pressure and vacuum. A refrigerant garage is called a compound gauge because it reads positive pressure as well as vacuum. Question 161. Which of the following does not require flame-resistant treatment? Artwork in a museum. Artwork in a museum does not require flame-resistant treatment, whereas decorations in hotel or building lobbies, or a heavy curtain in a theater, do require flame-resistant treatment. Question 162. An engineer observes a suction pressure gauge that reads saturation pressure of a refrigerant. If chilled water is circulated as the cooling medium, this reading will best be used to estimate the temperature of chilled water being pumped to the spaces being cooled. If chilled water were being circulated as the cooling medium, a reading of the saturation pressure of a refrigerant, shown on the suction pressure gauge, can be used to estimate the temperature of chilled water being pumped to the spaces being cooled. The saturation pressure can be used to estimate the temperature of the cooling medium. Question 163. Regardless of the ASHRAE refrigerant classification in use, in the event of a refrigerant escape, the engineer should be aware of asphyxiation. No matter what classification of refrigerant is in use, in the event of refrigerant escape, the engineer should be aware of asphyxiation. Page 25, questions 164 through 170. Question 164. What type of refrigerant is found inside the machine's gauges? Same type of refrigerant inside the machine. The machine gauges will contain the same refrigerant as is inside the machine. Question 165. If resistance is cut in half, what happens to the power factor? Increases by a factor of 2. Power is indirectly proportional to resistance, so if resistance is reduced, power increases. If resistance is cut in half, power factor increases by a factor of 2. Question 166. What are pre-hot works procedures performed prior to hot works? Check area once a day leading up to hot works. Prior to hot works, the pre-hot works procedures are to check the area once per day leading up to hot works. Question 167. A chilled water system has an air-cooled condensing unit on a roof during cold weather. Has what type of protection? Air limiting device. The chilled water system's air-cooled condensing unit on the roof is protected during cold weather by an air limiting device. Question 168. What is a compressor safety head? A spring on the valve plate. The compressor safety head is a spring on the valve plate. Question 169. Standpipe certificate should be available for FDNY and building inspector. The standpipe certificate should be available for FDNY and building inspector to see. Question 170. When is a chemical fire extinguisher system needed? Where water is not sufficient. Chemical fire extinguisher systems are needed where water would not be sufficient.